The Weiss EQ MP is the minimum phase, one-to-one code pour algorithm from the Weiss EQ1. It is a high-fidelity, feature and parameter optimized, professional mixing EQ workhorse with the transparency and surgical precision from the Weiss EQ1. Let's start by mixing an entire drum kit. We'd like to bring out the fundamental of the kick drum. We preserve the transient without any sort of a transient smear. But before we do, let's switch over to a darker mode, or the Dunkel interface, which will match my DAW a little better. By using one of our 7 fully parametric bands, we're able to isolate the fundamental of the kick drum with low latency and a lot less CPU load than the Weiss EQ1. We also went in and put a low cut just to remove any rumble before the fundamental of the kick. Now let's sweep to see if we could remove some of the mud that takes place after the fundamental of the kick. That's much better sound, but now let's go to the right-hand side and adjust our output gain to compensate for the boost on the kick. I'm going to switch my analyzer over into a slower mode. I'm also going to tilt the frequency analyzer so that I see more of the highs. Now we can put in a high cut to properly tame the harsh cymbals. Listen before. And now listen with the Weiss EQ MP. Let's start by EQing some vocals, and we'll remove the low end to get rid of some rumble that's not necessary.
There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me.
2 times internal oversampling and double precision 64-bit processing with sample rates of up to 192 kilohertz makes sure to preserve the integrity of your recording. We'll switch our analyzer to hold the average frequencies so that we get a better idea of what's going on in the vocal.
You and me. There is just a look I think it might be.
Using the interface, we'll turn the shelf into a bell and then boost the cue. There's some ringing in the vocals, so let's solo this band and see if we can find the frequency that we find offensive.
There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a look I think it might be right for us, for you and me.
That's better, but I still hear some additional ringing, so let's use a few more bands to see if we can find those frequencies.
There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me.
This whistling harmonic particularly stands out to me, so let's cut some of that. And still, there's one additional frequency that I want to use a really high Q value to cut.
There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a look I think it might be right for
Now that we've eliminated those ringing frequencies, let's put a tiny boost above all of those frequencies to round things out and balance them.
There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me.
With the offending frequencies gone, we can now use a shelf to lift up and open up the sound of the vocal.
For you and me. There is just a look I think it might be right for us, for you and me.
Let's mix some piano, and we're going to start by cutting the lows. We're going to go a little too far with the low cut to see where we start to lose some of the signal and then back off a bit. Our low and high cuts allow us to cut at a slope of 6, 12, 24, 48, or up to 96. But for this example, let's stick with the 12 dB per octave, which is a little more gentle. On top of that, there's a little bit of a woody resonance that I want to cut out of the low end, so let's solo a band and find that. Now that we've cleaned up the low end, let's switch the analyzer to hold the peaks and use a nice high Q value to find those ringing frequencies. I find this high whistle to be particularly offensive, but make sure to use your Q or bandwidth to adjust and fine-tune the perfect cut. I'm still finding there's one or two more frequencies that could use some cutting, but that doesn't mean I'm going to use each one. Sometimes I may just use my frequency bands to mark some frequencies that may need to be adjusted later on when we bring the piano into context with the full mix. We can now open up the top end of the piano without worrying about lifting up some ringing frequencies. And then let's use a high cut just to make sure the top end doesn't get too unruly. When you're done, put everything back together in your mix and fine-tune each band for the perfect sculpting with your EQ. With 7 fully parametric bands, the Weiss EQ MP gives you the same sound quality as the Weiss EQ1, but with lower latency and a lot less CPU load. This means it's possible to run a large number of instances during a mixing session, giving you the power to have mastering grade equalization during your mix.